podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to Howie the podcast from Roker Report as we continue to nervously discuss our upcoming Championship playoff final against Sheffield United at Wembley on Saturday. And we'll hear from a number of voices this week, and we've got a cracking guest to give us some valuable insight. But first, I have to introduce you to Gavin Henderson. All right, mate?
You have to introduce us.
Well, yeah.
Didn't really sell us to the people there. I am all right, mate. How are you?
I don't have to sell you. You sell yourself, don't you?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I just turn up now, mate. Don't really need to sell anything.
Exactly. And we've made a deal beforehand. We're not going to talk about Ballard's goal, are we? At all. We're not even going to mention it.
Well, we've mentioned it now, but
well, done now, innit?
we've thought about it.
That's it.
Have you bought your T-shirt? Did you see them? I've got to admit, I didn't like that. I can understand the club trying to cash in on it, but time on the front. If I see anyone walking around with one of them on, I'm just going to think, oh God.
It'll look great if we, after the final whistle, if we beat Sheffield United. But before then, I'm not sure. Don't like
buy
it.
myself one if we win.
That's it. Yeah, but yeah, I did mention we've got a proper guest on. Because today's guest is not only a respected coach, writer and broadcaster, but he can potentially provide a unique insight, as he was also on the coaching staff the last time Sunderland played and won at Wembley. So today we are very pleased to be speaking to David Preece. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having us on, lads.
Yeah, how's it going, mate?
Yeah, going well, mate. Just, I don't know if everyone knows, but I've been working in India the last couple of seasons, so I'm just back from my second season there.
Yeah, Mumbai City, isn't it? How is it over there?
An experience. It's a shock to the system once you first get over there, but it was. Yeah, I initially went over with Simon Grayson, obviously formerly of this parish, and I spent the season with him, and then moved over to Mumbai City, which is part of the City Group, and another season there. So it's been a great experience so far.
Yeah. Because I've spent a couple of weeks over in India, which isn't much, but I tell you what, best food I've ever had in my life, by the way.
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a lottery depending on where you get it from, but you soon learn which places are safe and which are not safe,
Well, we had tours. We had tour guides and because I went with work, so they were kind of looking after us. So we had proper people, and it was nothing but kind of 5-star, and all that sort of stuff. The best of the best.
I was going to say, it's not like them videos you see online, is it, where the guy's got rats running all over the food and using his hands to stir the sauce and things, because that's just my immediate impression of street food. And I'm like, I would want none of that. I'd just be eating McDonald's and KFC to try and be safe.
The thing is, that's what I mean. A lot of some of the staff who we work with take us for a coffee, or will take us for a samosa somewhere, just some street corner. And you've got some guy in the back just with a big pot, just with his hands, just mashing up these samosas out the back before they put them in the oil, But it's a great experience. It's a wonderful country,
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it, and breakfast was a bit hit and miss, but everything else absolutely fantastic. We should do a food podcast sometime, Gav. I know what you're like with your bait. We should do that at some point. But yeah,
in Sunderland would be the extent of my culinary expertise. I think I don't go much further than that. Tell you all about the places that do cracking Sunday dinners down the beach and that, though.
That's all you need, isn't it? Well, anyway, let's get back to the footy. Look, in general, David, because it's probably, a good thing that maybe you've been kind of looking, from so far away the last couple of years, but, you've seen that kind of flip between last year and this year. So, I mean, has Sunderland actually surprised you this season?
It was probably more of a surprise last season. How things sort of tapered off the way that they did, but I think the fact that, you've got a lot of young players in there, there's been a steady sort of incline into where the club's been going since the takeover. And Yeah, you probably say like a little dip now sooner or later was to be expected, but I think, nothing's sort of like in a linear line like for success where it goes from one point to another. There's always ups and downs. But I think that sometimes to get to the place where you are now, you've got to go through these things. And it's just part of the course.
Yeah. And I mean, again, focusing on this season, obviously Régis Le Bris came in and you could argue we had a little bit of a mess to sort out. But, how big an achievement is it that he came in and took us to fourth and locked us in there, and then now he's taken us to Wembley in his first season in the playoff final?
Yeah, it just goes to show what a good start of a season can do for you, because it's so important to keep you up there. It was a brilliant start of the season, and I know that a lot of people will point towards the sort of last 5-6 games when playoffs place was secured, and say that that might be a cause for concern. But to be honest with you, the way that I've looked at that is that once you move away a team or a player's motivation, whether it's through nothing to play for, whether it's pre-season, whether it's no manager being in place, once you take away some motivation from the team, the squad, then you're going to get that. So I haven't really been worried about the last few weeks, because I knew that once you get in this stage and you get the playoffs, you've got no choice but to just to switch on and perform.
Yeah. I mean, Gav, we've kind of touched on it a few times, especially with that run, but it's interesting. Sometimes you have to remind yourself of the fantastic season we've had, especially, as David said, that first half of the season. And people are focusing a lot on how it's been maybe since, you could argue, since January, February time, and how it's gone since then. But you don't finish fourth by accident in the league, especially with a gap so big. And you don't chase three teams like Sheffield United, Burnley and Leeds like we did for so long if you're not a good side. And it sounds really strange, but actually we almost have to do this periodically, where we have to remind ourselves that we're a good team.
Yeah, and it comes back to this whole discussion around the right way to do things, the right way to play football. Coventry played football the right way and Sunderland didn't. That kind of attitude around things. I think what we've done is we as the season sort of flowed and flexed and we've picked up injuries and we've had issues, what we've done is we've just had to adapt. We didn't have Mundo for large swathes of the season. We didn't have Enzo Lefebvre for a big chunk of the period he's been here. We've just had to adapt the team to try and make it work. And if that's meant not playing a particularly nice brand of football at all times, then we've done it just to achieve results. And you said it yourself. You don't finish fourth by accident. And yes, we have chased those top three teams for a long time. But for a long time, they were chasing us too. We were top till November time, weren't we? So you're right. You do have to periodically remind yourself, and you don't finish fourth by accident. We finished fourth, and we also finished fourth by some way. I think even despite losing 5 games on the bounce, we still finished by 7 points ahead of the next nearest team, I think. Well, I might be wrong in that. But regardless, we've had a brilliant season. And I've said this a few times to you, Chris, when you look at last season and the way it went, finishing 16th and playing some pretty boring, dull football, and just the whole sort of feeling around the club wasn't great. To have gone on a step further and be in the playoff final is an amazing achievement. And no matter what happens at the weekend, I hope that's remembered. I'm sure there'll be a bit of emotion either way, if we win or if we lose at Wembley. But I think once the dust settles, we've got to sit back and look at this season as a massive achievement for a group of young players to perform as they have done, to turn up in big games, to really follow some pretty strict instruction from a coach who demands a lot of them is commendable. And we're setting up lads to have really good careers in the game. You look at some of these players and they might not always be with Sunderland, but they're going to go on and do some really good things. And that's because of what we've achieved this season and before now. So absolutely, if anybody is looking at the season as a failure, which I've seen some people say, not many, but some people say that they feel like we've maybe failed in not maintaining a place in the top 2 beyond November time. I just think you're wrong, because it's been a brilliant season and we've got to remember that.
And David, you know the fan base as well as we do, coming through as a player and, being a coach and obviously, following the lads. And, I've always thought that Sunderland fans are always glass half empty. And do you think this is part of it, that this season we've had a fantastic season, yet going into the end of the season, okay, you can talk about the run of results and, that's going to happen. But even before then, even missing out maybe on the top two, there was this element of, no, it's happening to Sunderland again. And we have to, as I was saying to Gav before, we have to keep saying we're a good team. We've had a good season.
Listen, I'm no different than anybody else. It's exactly the way that I see things. I'm a proper Sunderland fan in that respect. But I think that I know there was a lot of negativity around sort of like second half of last season, which to be expected. Like I said, there was a lot of hope and optimism, and maybe an expectation as well that because we got in the playoffs the season before, that we'd build on that and the way that we built on the season before. But I think that there's a little bit of a change this year. I think just listen to other people speak and other people's opinions. And I don't think there's any sense of entitlement there going into this game saying like, we have to win. We need to win. If we don't win, it'll be a disaster. And of course we want to win. Don't get me wrong. And it will still be disappointing if we don't. But there's a lot more optimism and hope and kind of like looking beyond the final. That's saying that, well, there's a lot of potential still in this team. And look what they've shown this year. If with a little bit of experience, a little bit more maturity, another couple of tweaks, another couple of players, then even if we don't go this weekend, that next year will still be, there's a lot of still look forward to. So I think it's probably a little bit more balanced this time around, I think.
Yeah. Well, being a former goalkeeper yourself and obviously a goalkeeper coach now, I thought we should probably talk about Anthony Patterson a bit and the season he's had. Because actually, I was thinking about this after so long of not being talked about, if you like, because his performances were so steady. It was almost like, well, Anthony Patterson is just there. He didn't do anything you could say he was spectacular or anything like that. He was just there and he was so rock solid that you didn't really mention him. So then when he did have a wobble in the second half of this season, it was obviously a high profile one. I mean, could we just put it down to that being a period that all goalkeepers go through at some point?
100%. Don't think any goalkeeper, there's not many goalkeepers in the world and in goalkeeping history that haven't gone through a little period like that. But I mean, I'll always get protective of goalkeepers and certainly I'll always get protective of Patro just because of how much I think of him. But I found it astounding how much criticism he has got this season, looking about. And I know that a lot of it's on social media and you shouldn't really, take much notice of it. I'm sure he won't be taking any notice of it. But I was surprised. So like it became a bit defensive about him just simply because I think that over the past 4 seasons, he's been outstanding. And I think in past sides, in the previous 3 seasons before this year, he's probably had a lot more to do. He's probably made a lot more saves that people are going to stand up and take notice of. But I think that, coming into this season, they've been a lot more defensively solid. He's been protected a lot more. So then there's a little bit of a change of mindset needed where you just have to be there when you're in those few occasions when you are needed. And of course, when you make mistakes, people, the criticism comes, you understand that. You take that on the chin when you make mistakes. But I think that overall, I'm actually glad that they've been able to hang on to him so long, just because I think it's that much of him.
Yeah. And knowing him like you do, were you quite comfortable, because I mean, a lot's been said about his character in that he takes things in his stride and he's quite calm and collected about everything. When he was going through everything, were you quite comfortable in the fact that, he'll get through this and he won't let that outside noise impact him?
100%. And simply because I think if he was going to have a real bad dip, I would have expected it to be the season after we went up, just because, it can come quite quickly for younger players. But because of like you've just said there about his attitude and his demeanour and the way that he approaches games, he's not a keeper that's flighty and up and down. That's what you don't want. You want somebody who's emotionally stable. And you can see that he probably a little bit when he's younger, probably a little bit too sort of like too stable. But it's a great trait to have to take emotion out of the game like he does. Like I said, you don't often get in flush. You don't see him shouting, ranting, and raving at people. And I think it's a great strength. He's built up a good authority by the way that he does things. Still like I know that there's been a few question marks about his ability to deal with crosses, but for me, that's just dealing. Sometimes the higher you go, you've got to adjust to the quality that comes in the box. I think he's adjusted to that really well, and yeah, like I said, the authority that he gives to the team and the calmness just spread, he gives to his defence that helps the team, and I think that's one of his massive traits as a goalkeeper.
Yeah. I mean, Gav, David mentioned he thought that dip from Patterson might be the season after, and actually Dan Neil went through that experience in the season when we got promoted, first season in the Championship. And you said at the time that you just thought the club would treat Patterson the same way as they treated Dan Neil in terms of, being comfortable just throwing him back in. And it's turned out to be the right call, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's been virtually ever present for what, three and a half seasons now, pretty much. I think he displaced Ron Thorben Hoffman, didn't he, in that promotion season? And he's rarely been under threat. I think the only time he hasn't played this season is when he had a little injury, and Simon Moore came in and kept 3 clean sheets. I get it with Patterson. He does. I can't deny it. Sometimes he does make me scared for my life when he comes flying out. But what I like about him is he recovers very quickly, and he done this in the playoff semis. You've talked about it a few times on the last week or so, Chris. The moment early in the game when he come herring out and completely missed the ball, and had that been definitive in the game, the daggers would have been pointed at him. But look, he recovered well, and I think he had a great 2 games after that. I think when you look at the solidity of that back line, he's got a real part to play in that. And for me, I think a lot of the stick he gets is unjust, actually. I think, people maybe don't see this side of him, and David will have seen this plenty having worked with him, but he's very, very level all the time. He's not an emotional goalkeeper, I wouldn't say. You get some goalkeepers who they beat their chest and they're really passionate on the pitch, and a bit like Jordan Pickford, and sometimes he gets caught out with that, Pickford, doesn't he? He has been in high profile games where the passions maybe got over him and it affects his performance. With Anthony Patterson, whether he makes a mistake or he has a good game, he's very much the same at all times. And I'll ask you this, actually, David. Is that a rare trait in a goalkeeper? Because I've got to be honest, when I think back the goalkeepers Sunderland have had over the years, I don't think many of them have been as sort of calm-headed as Anthony Patterson actually is.
No, I think, like I just said, like it's probably one of the best traits you can have as a goalkeeper. And I think that whatever works for you, works for you. I would never try and change anybody's their approach to the game and their personality. What you want is your goalkeeper, or any player really, but especially goalkeepers, to bring their personality out on the pitch. So like when they come onto the pitch, that's who they are, and everything becomes natural for them. So whether he's someone like Jordan Pickford, listen, you can't say it hasn't worked for Jordan Pickford. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
All those caps for England, World Cups, Euros, all the Premier League appearances. That's what works for him. So great. Really, really dig into that and really sort of like make sure that he can flourish by doing that. Of course, if it does affect him in the games, like you said, it affects him in the odd game, which I think you can probably take, and as he's got older, I mean, you look at his performance this season for Everton, as he's got older, he's become more consistent. And like I said, Patlow's exactly the same in that respect, where he brings his personality. It's not somebody who's a rant and raver. It's not somebody who's, people think like, I always compare 2 goalkeepers from 2 ends of the spectrum. At Man United, you had Peter Schmeichel, you had Edwin van der Sar, and they were both 2 different characters and both brilliant goalkeepers. And I think that the way the Patlow is, I love that from the first minute about him, how he was so calm.
Yeah, you mentioned Raver, and actually I look at Jordan Pickford and I constantly just think that the sounds of the New Monkeys just going round on a loop in his head, and that's what he feeds off for 90 minutes when he's on the pitch. But But yeah, I mean, actually, I'm intrigued just on the goalkeeping thing, because you always hear about this goalkeeping community, you know, and like the 3 goalkeepers or the 4 goalkeepers, they go and train and all this. And, you know, you talk about Patterson going through a bad patch, and Simon Moore, you know, 35-year-old, brought in as a number 2. And, you know, you hear about his character around the club, and I'm sure he was great in that situation. But I always find it difficult to get my head around it, because I'm be thinking, if that was me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I want to get on the pitch, and I want to end up being number 1. And it's just strange the way it works.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance. And I think the way that I always looked at it, and I think most goalkeepers look at it, you want to get in, if you're going to play, you want to get in on your own merits. You know, so like the fact that you're doing so well that you don't give the manager an option but to play you. And if you're not, then you have to play your part and your role in that, within that squad, and then within the goalkeeping squad as well. So it's like a sub squad of the team. And so when it comes to Friday, if you're not playing, then you've got to be supporting that goalkeeper to make sure that he performs to his best ability so the team wins. And to do that, you've got to create an environment where that's the norm, like a real sort of healthy, competitive environment where everyone wants to do well themselves, but they want everyone to do well. And it's not easy. I mean, that's the most difficult thing to do, to take people's egos out of it, and to take people's individual motivations out of it for the collective. But as a goalkeeper, I think you're more likely to do that. And I think, you know, you've got to wait for your chance. And if that chance comes along, you take it or you don't take it. It's all down to the manager who plays. And once that decision's been made, you know, there's nothing personal within the group. You know, you support each other as much as possible. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why Simon was brought in, you know, to not just to push Anthony because he's a good goalkeeper in his own right, but also because of the way that he is and the experience that he's got and the experience that he can lend to Pato.
Just to chime in on that as well, I wonder what you think about the situation beyond this season when you look at somebody like Matty Young, who, for all intents and purposes, when you look at it, England under-19 international, just had a really, really good loan at Salford. Next season, he's going to be wanting to be at least pushing Anthony Patterson for his place in the team. And the way the club's ran, you wouldn't be surprised if they gave him a good opportunity. So, like, does that then change things? Because it's not often you get, like, ultimately you look at Matty Young, possibly the best young goalkeeper, and Pato, who we all rate massively, is a fantastic goalkeeper. But when you talk about he's an England cap and he's playing league football at 17-year-old, you know, you run about probably the best goalkeeper who's came through probably since Pickford. Like, how does that affect everything then in that relationship? Because all of a sudden, you know, rather than having a group where everybody's built there in the goalkeeping fraternity to be support mechanism for Patterson, all of a sudden you've got this kid coming through who's going to be like, I want to be playing for Sunderland. You know what I mean? How does that affect the balance of things?
I think first and foremost, like the club will have a pathway already set out for Matty. I know that they have, you know. So like whatever the next step is for him, you know, he'll take it next season. And for most goalkeepers, the way that John Pickford did it was probably it became a blueprint, because as soon as he did that, then I know, speaking to Dean Henderson, as soon as he saw Jordan Pickford and what he'd done, he was like that. He was at Manchester United at the time. And he's saying, I want to go out and play now. So he went up to Grimsby. Can't remember where he went out after Grimsby, but, you know, that was his sort of, he looked at John Pickford and said, that's how I'm going to do it. And it became a blueprint. And of course, for young goalkeepers, or young players, as soon as they're ready to play men's football and to make that next step up from developmental sort of football into competitive football, you've got to push them and make them do it. And like I said, the club will have a pathway ready for him, all set out what they want to do, where they want to put him. And then look, obviously it will eventually get to a point where he'll be ready for, fingers crossed, ready for the first team of Sunderland. And once you get to that point, then it's all about, you know, what point do they actually take that decision to put him in the side. And then again, it's a decision about what they want to do with Pato after that. Because I know over the past 2-3 seasons, there's been a hell of a lot of interest in Pato. I know there's been some in there, you know, some in the press, but sort of in reality, there's been a lot of interest in Pato. So if Pato keeps, you know, if he kicks on again, or they do get promoted on the weekend, and he makes that next step up to the Premier League, then that's when the questions will come. Or they'll face the question. Do you cash in, or do we keep going with with what we got? Can we get better than Pato? And if you can't, then you stick with Pato and you give him what he deserves.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm going to avoid going off on a rant about under-21s football at this point because I could go off on a tangent and have a rant about that instead of loan moves. But last one on Patterson, David. He's just turned 25, which actually I was surprised at. I thought you were still younger than that. And like we've seen, Sunderland's number one for around 3.5 years now. You were obviously around when he broke through in that season and you saw what a player he was then. Has he developed like you would have expected him to in the last few years?
After that year, yeah, definitely. Coming at the start of that season that he came into the side in League One under Lee Johnson, there's actually a lot of conversations about whether he should start the season or not. I think he played against Hearts up in Scotland in pre-season, and Jono thought a hell of a lot of him. And, so it was a big decision. I think in the end, he obviously just went for experience with Lee Birch. And there was ins and outs and ups and downs. COVID, robbed us of both him and Tobin. And Pato eventually got his chance in the end through merit because he deserved it. But also he proved to us in his short loan spell at in Notts County that he was more than capable of doing what we wanted him to do. That was the whole idea of sending him to Notts County, was because I knew the manager, I knew the type of football that's Notts County. But even though they were in the National League, they tried to play football the right way at a high level, and he'd be asked to do things that he hadn't been asked to do before. So there's lots of situations where people say, sometimes his distribution is great, or you're not great for coming for crosses. Then after 3 or 4 games playing for Notts County, through the encouragement of Ian Birchnell, he's standing 20 yards outside his box in between his 2 centre-halves, and he's the one that's making the passes to the 10 in the 10 space, being comfortable on the ball, coming, taking everything. And that loan spell just proved to us, well, he can do it. He's unfazed by the step up. He can make the step up. And then once he came at the side, of course, there was a little bit of when he first came in the back and the side, he was in and out because of injuries and things, and he performed really well. And we were really happy with him. But towards the end of the season, he just grew and grew and grew. And then his performance in the playoff final was just, that's when he just showed himself to say, I can handle this. So the conversation that we had the week later about, do we need to bring somebody else in for the championship, or can Pato handle it? And Pato could handle it. That was the decision, and it was obvious to me.
Yeah. Well, going back to that day at Wembley 2022, I mean, thinking about it from a coach's perspective, how you were involved. I mean, thinking about the build-up, was it all about keeping the players relaxed for the game? And was there a point in the days leading up where you almost had to go flick a switch?
Looking back now, it feels disappointing because it wasn't special, but everything looked like there was no conscious effort. Well, and it didn't feel like it was a conscious effort. There wasn't anything spoken about. They were saying that we had to play things down, make sure the players were just level, especially after that, the win against Sheffield Wednesday. Yeah, beating Sheffield Wednesday, the draw at Hillsborough. After that, you got a space of time where you can just get some good training done. It was no different any other week. It didn't feel any different any other week. Apart from people running around trying to get tickets and things like that. But apart from that, the training, the feeling around the club, it didn't feel like it was a huge game. And I know that in the context of Sunderland's history, it might go on to be like an even bigger game than what it actually was. But it was a big game. There's no getting away from it. But it just wasn't the feeling. The nighttime meal at the hotel down in London for breakfast the next morning. Yeah, it didn't feel like there was a lot of pressure on us, and I think that showed in the game that the players were free from the first minute, and that's credit to them. I'm not saying that's anything to do with the staff or anything like that. Like I said, there wasn't any real conscious effort to take that away from them, but the players themselves just handled the week so brilliantly, and the game even better.
I mean, Gav, actually, listening to that, it's funny, isn't it? Because if you think about the atmosphere as a fan, because I'm not sure I've ever approached a big game in terms of Sunderland like I've ever felt before that game, because I remember travelling down to London, not even considering that we'd get beat against Wickham. It was almost like I'm going down to London to watch us win. And even like before the game, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't, the night before, wasn't really thinking about the game, thinking, are we going to win? I just thought, well, I just knew we were going to get promoted. It was a really strange thing about that game against Wickham.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was the same as you. I think most people were, to be fair. It was almost like a massive home game in the south, wasn't it? Because it was just, we knew we were going to completely dwarf Wickham in terms of the amount of people in the ground. So you knew the atmosphere was going to go in our favour. You knew the whole sense of the occasion was going to go in our favour. And we were on a massive unbeaten run as well, weren't we? So that helped, because everyone was just on top of the world, really confident about our chances. But I mean, to be honest, I felt, certainly as a fan, I felt like a lot of that came from Alex Neil, because the way he communicated with us in the press, the way that he answered questions, like you said, David, he treated it like any other occasion. He didn't make a big deal out of it. When the press were trying to get him to give sound bites about, oh, Sunderland's record at Wembley's not very good, and the record in the playoffs isn't very good, and what about the atmosphere? And he just played it all down. He was like, what are you on about? It's just a game. It's just a game, you know? So as a fact, I think that translated to everybody, because when you hear your manager speak like that, you start thinking the same way. You're like, oh yeah, he's right. He's right. And I felt like a lot of that did come from him, and we've given him a lot of praise for that, haven't we, Chris, in terms of the feeling he created. And there are a lot of contrasts to this. I know we're going to talk about that in a bit, but there are a lot of contrasts to the way that this coach has treated this year. Because when you listen to him speak, he's the same. He's just like, you know, we're just doing the same thing we do every day. And I imagine that's massive, because we talked about emotion in goalkeepers before and how sometimes it can get the better of them. Emotion going into big occasions can get the better of you too. You can almost be too emotional to the point that it drains you, and you kind of, your normal processes go out the window, and you're just like, shit, I'm playing at Wembley, where really it's just another game of football that you have to win.
Yeah, and the point you just made there about it's another game at Wembley. There's another game at Wembley for many of the players. I think 5 or 6 who started the last game will have been part of that side. They've already been through that. It's something that the Sheffield United players, or as a side anyway, and as a club, haven't got. And I think that so that's a big advantage for the players. But I think, going back to Alex, I think you're right. The way that Alex was naturally as a leader and the way he communicated was, he took that away from the players, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. And it's funny, because we was sat in the hotel the night before, and we just sat and we'd had one drink together, all the coaching staff, all the medical staff, and everyone. And Alex was just like, what do you think we're going to win tomorrow? And I'm not a huge believer in fate or things are meant to be, but I just said that too much stuff has gone on, and there's too much stuff has happened for me to be in this position now. From being a kid at the club, being released, going through my career, and then starting a coaching career, for me to end up back in this position, it just it's not. There's no entitlement there. There's no we deserve to. We're going to win, like I said. But it was just the fact that I just thought that there was too much had happened for me to end up in this spot right now for us not to win.
Yeah, I was reminded of Martin reminded me recently of I think it was a build up to the game at Hillsborough, when they said, "Are you worried about the atmosphere at Hillsborough?" And he said, we're worried about a few people saying boo. And it was that sort of thing that kind of got everyone behind him and got everyone calm about the situation. But Gav touched on a point, actually, talking about, and you hear about this big Wembley pitch, where actually in reality, I think it's exactly the same size as the pitch at the Stadium of Light. But you hear a lot of players when they talk about playing at Wembley that it almost has a draining effect, because the adrenaline's been pumping all day. And then suddenly when they get in the middle of the match, it drops and they kind of crash on the pitch. I mean, is that actually something that coaching teams have to be wary of?
Yes. I mean, it is about, we talk about keeping players emotionally stable and keeping everything, try and keep it low key. Yeah. It can be draining before. And if you think about things too much and you're getting too excited and the adrenaline starts pumping too early, But also, I mean, it's probably the only worry that going into this game, that if it turns out to be another game like the Coventry games, that's effective. I think everyone's expecting good weather, if the occasion, it can have a greater effect, really, But having said that, you look at it, it's all right. It's Wembley. It's a playoff final. But, was Friday's game not a big game in a huge atmosphere? And I know it's at home and I know it's a bit more familiar, but these are still big games. So going into it again, I think there'll be a lot of confidence and a lot of, not, like I said, not overconfident, just real, word I'm looking for. But yeah, but there was just a quiet confidence going into it. Nobody's going to be afraid. Nobody's going to be overawed by the occasion. And I think that's what I'm looking at. That nobody's going to be overawed. So whether the pitch and the weather can have a bigger effect this time, I wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah. And I'll not bring Gavin on this because he'll go on a rant about, when he turns into a footballing dinosaur. But we had Don Goodman on this week and he called Régis Le Bris' tactics against Coventry a masterstroke. I mean, what did you make of the change to 4-4-2 and bringing Dan Ballard in seemingly out of nowhere?
So, the end result doesn't always sort of justify, what you do in the game and your approach to the game. It was like one of my former managers at Aberdeen, Eb Scovdall. I think we lost 1-0 at Celtic Park, and he said the operation went very well, but the patient still died anyway. And it was like, it's like I said, just because you win the game doesn't, or if you lose the game doesn't justify that you've got the wrong tactics. But I think that, going 4-4-2, in a game where you can't lose it, a lot of teams are going back 4-4-2 now, out possession. It's it's solid, it's easy to instruct. And I think that for players that, going into this game where you don't want to risk too much, but you don't want to sit back so you get damaged too much. It's a great formation to drop back into. I think it just gives you the right, depending how you want to press, it can be perfect. It's very sort of, it's very flexible. You can always change things slightly in that formation as well. At the end of the day, all formations can be changed at the moment, whether you're in possession, out of possession, whether you're attacking, defending, whatever. So it can be seen as a masterstroke, definitely. But I think a lot of people, I don't get that Sunderland were lucky because Coventry played really well. There's a lot of that going about, especially from opposition fans. But I also think that it's probably the way that I expected Régis to play before he came in. Just speaking with a couple of friends who were coaching in France at the minute, it's kind of what I thought that the type of football that he would play. Sitting in a little bit, hit teams on the break. But the tweaks that he's made and the way that he's approached games is, over the course of a season, you can't get lucky. And I think going at these two games against Coventry, you can't just say they're lucky as well because of the rest of the season, what's happened.
Yeah, well, I can't say I'm not pleased about 4-4-2 coming back into fashion. It's about time, if you ask me. But Gav, in terms of the final, they finished 16 points ahead of Sunderland. If you stick their 2 deducted points back on, we'll beat them at home. We've talked about deserving more in the game at their place. And when you read about the final, I'm starting to get the feeling that it actually might shock a few people if we win the game.
Yeah, I think so, because people outside of the Sunderland bubble are focusing a lot on that last 5 games without understanding the context necessarily. I just keep hearing people say, worst run anyone's ever had going into playoffs, 5 defeats. And it's like, well, we can explain it. The manager explained it repeatedly in his press conferences by saying, without saying it, that we were kind of taking our foot off the gas. We were trying to rest and rotate and get ourselves mentally and physically ready for 3 grueling games of football. And I know that on the face of it, it doesn't look great, but I'm more bothered about the 2 games against Coventry. I'm more bothered about something which Don Goodman touched on when he spoke to you yesterday, Chris, which was the fact that these lads have turned up in big games all season. When we played Sheffield United, when we played Leeds, when we've played Burnley, when we played Coventry in the playoffs, they've turned up despite being a young group. And I thought that was a really good point he made, because not a lot of people are focusing on that. They're focusing on the fact we lost a bunch of nothing games that nobody's ever going to remember if we get promoted. To me, it doesn't. That doesn't. When we spoke before about like the fact we've had a really good season, we've had a good season. We haven't had a bad season because we lost 5 games that were wrote off effectively. But hey, if it means people underrate us and it means people kind of play us down, I'm all for that. I'd rather be the underdog going into this. And I said this when we recorded another pod this week, which will actually be out after this one, so I'll not give too much away. But to the person I was speaking to, I said it almost, the pressure's all on Sheffield United for me, because they're the ones who've came down with the Premier League budget. They're the ones who, this is what I said and he didn't agree with us, I think they blew automatic promotion. They were clear at the top. They lost 3 on the bounce and they fell out the race. So as good a season as they've had, they were in pole position with a handful of games to go. They ended up in the playoffs. They've, like I said, spent an awful lot of money to build a brand new squad for the Championship. Chris Wilder is a very emotional manager. I mean, he's a good manager, but he lets things get on top of him sometimes and maybe says the wrong things. And I just think the pressure's all on them. The pressure isn't on Sunderland, because at the end of the day, if we're all honest, I don't think everybody expected Sunderland to be in a position where they might get promoted. We thought we could get there, and we'd like to think that we had the potential to push for promotion this year. But to be in the playoff final, I don't think many people saw that coming back in the summer. So for me, yeah, the pressure's all on them, and I'm happy for that. You mentioned before about the Wickham game, Chris, and how we almost went into that with supreme confidence. We should have, really. We were the better team. We were the bigger club with a bigger fan base on the day. That would have made a big difference. On this occasion, it's very much, kind of neck and neck in many regards. And for me, I like that. I like the fact we're underdogs. We haven't went into many Wembley games as underdogs down the years. And the last time we did was that Man City game, and we played without a lot of pressure in that first half. If you remember, back in 2014, we took the lead. We kind of went into half time. We shell-shocked Man City. If we can go one step further and do that again and win, then great. But it'll probably come as a result of having very, very little pressure on ourselves. And I think I would rather be the team without pressure going into this game.
Yeah. I mean, and David, thinking back to 2022, like Gav's just said, when we were favourites against Wickham, when we had that feeling that it would just be our day, and, we were kind of big favourites. Being slight underdogs for Saturday's game in some ways, does that change how you build up in terms of how you mentally approach a game like that, or should it just not make a difference?
No, I don't think it'll make a difference. I think, as professionals, like, you approach it the way that the game is, and I don't think anybody would be going in there thinking they'd be massive underdogs. Do you know what I mean? Sheffield United might be the favourites. They've got a few high-profile players playing for them. There's no doubt they've got quality in that side. And I think that, people I've heard a lot of talk in interviews, managers lately, about talking about moments in games, and that's what, it'll be a moment that wins the game. It's the only danger with Sheffield United, I think, that because they do have quality, they do have, real quality in the side, that's what might see them through, rather than out footballing us and coming up tactically with, something that unlocks us, whichever way we play. It'll probably be like one of those moments. So that's the only danger that I'm feeling at the moment, that they'll just that one bit of quality that they might have. But having said that, look at the quality. I think you're probably right what you say. You look at the quality that's been shown in this side throughout the season at times. Isidore, Mayenda, Pat Roberts has always got the quality, Mundell as well. So that quality, even though it's maybe not proven at this time over course of a few seasons, that quality's still there. So I don't think it's as, if people talk about underdogs, I just think it's a slight.
Yeah. Well, talking about the way we might or might not set up, because a lot of the conversation about the semi-final was about Coventry and how they liked to keep the ball, and Frank Lampard played more of a possession game. As Gav mentioned, Chris Wilder, I think he's a bit more direct, and especially with Kiefer Moore up front, it makes sense to play that way. Do you think that might mean we'll see a Sunderland side that's more on the front foot rather than trying to contain Sheffield United?
I'm not too sure. I mean, obviously, in a one-off game, it's a little bit more different. Over the course of 2 games, you can be a lot more tactical and take different approaches. With just a one-off game like this, I think the approach you're going to have to take really is to make sure that, call them red zones. So like start the game well, before half-time, after half-time, secure those red zones to make sure that what wins you the game is going to be your quality and the way that you play in the game. And it's probably like any other game in that respect, but even more so in these games, to make sure these red zones are always going to be that you don't concede, that you don't risk a lot in those at those times, and to make sure that, like I said, that quality that you've got, whether it's set pieces, whether it's being able to break on teams, that's been a great strength this season. So if that's the way that Sunderland scored a lot of the goals, and a lot of goals have been scored that way, then why stray away from that? And if it means something, a little bit of pressure, it's maybe a little bit different when you've got people like Kiefer Moore in the box. When teams can just throw the ball into someone like him and he can bully defenders. But again, it's just about, like I said, making sure that when you do get the ball, that you hurt teams. So it doesn't matter whether you're playing possession football, or you're playing a counter-attacking football. It's what you do with the ball that counts. And as long as they can do that, they'll get a result.
Yeah. Gav, what do you think Le Bris got up his sleeve? Because do you think that the way we played against Coventry, that was the plan for Coventry, and he's just going to have a different plan for Sheffield United?
He's had far too long to think about this to not have a separate plan for each game. I think the big thing with Régis Le Bris compared to many other managers, I think he actually genuinely lives and breathes this. Like he is obsessed with every single granular detail of what goes into every aspect of his job, which I guess in some cases might be to his detriment. But when it comes to big occasions and big moments, I think it means he's got every plan covered. I fully expect him to have a million different plans for every eventuality when it comes to what happens at Wembley. And I'm sure the players have had to communicate very clearly how they want him to play. We talked about the mini pre-season in quotation marks that we went through at the end of the season, but a lot of it will have been preparation for the playoffs. It'll have been, this is how we're going to do this, is how we're going to do that. And I'm very clear on it. And you could tell that in the Coventry game plan, particularly the first leg, where you just saw, we surprised Coventry. Like Frank Lampard wasn't expecting to see 2 up front. He wasn't expecting us to go 4-4-2. He wasn't expecting a lot of that, I don't think, which is why he looked so shell-shocked when he came out after the game and kind of admitted he didn't see it coming, And I expect it to be the same down at Wembley. What I am expecting is, for all we've not seen Enzo Lafay and Romain Mundle play together a great deal, I think we will. I think we're going to see both of them on the pitch at the same time. I have heard a little murmur that Patrick Roberts is touch and go with his fitness, which if that's the case, preparing for this is one game, by the way. So if there's any chance that Patrick Roberts isn't going to be available, they've got to plan for something without him. And if he's going to be fit, then maybe he's on the bench. I don't know. But, we can't spend all week hoping Patrick Roberts is going to be fit. I think we've got to have a game plan without him, and we've got to work on that just in case he's not available, which would probably mean Rigg starting on the right-hand side is the indication I've been given that they're looking at, with Mayenda up front and then Isidore on the bench as an option to give us a bit of pace and legs if we need it later in the game, which to me I think is a sound plan against a team who are going to probably have a lot of the ball. It'll be, I think it would be difficult given the quality they've got in midfield with Hamer and Sousa in particular, and City Peck, who's a good player, to go with 2 at Wembley. I just think we get overrun. I think we've got to go with a 3. Rigg gives us a little bit more tactical and defensive cover without the ball if he's on the right-hand side. And I thought he did really well there when he came on against Coventry. I thought we all of a sudden, that left-back who'd had the run of that side of the pitch for 2 games, all of a sudden he had someone up against him, challenging him physically, and the ball was going over the top. And Rigg was given as good as he gave, and actually got the better of him as his fresher legs started to tell. So I'm expecting us to be a little bit more like the Sunderland we've seen for the majority of the season, where we were in that sort of 4-5-1 kind of style without the ball, with my ender being the one leading the press. So, but at the same time, though, I'm saying this because I'm a Sunderland fan and I'm obsessed with the granularity when it comes to everything. I don't necessarily expect that Sheffield United will see it that way. I think they'll be planning for a couple of different eventualities. In fact, if you're watching the Coventry game and you're thinking, bloody hell, we're too up front their pace, and that game, by the way, on New Year's Day at the Stadium of Light, where we totally surprised Chris Wilder and went to up front, and Mayenda and Isidore played right up against their central defenders and caused them no end of bother. That'll play into the thinking too. So, a long way around giving a short answer, Chris. I think he's going to have many plans, but from the start of the game, I think we're probably going to see something more like Sunderland from earlier in the season, and for the majority of the season, that sort of similar system that we've played.
Yeah, I mean, David, just quickly, have you got any gut feelings about how some of those big decisions are going to go in terms of the starting 11?
Well, I mean, I wasn't aware that Patrick Roberts was struggling there, but I think that the only, like I said, the only worry I do have is about the some quality in the individuals that Sheffield United have got and how they handle Kiefer Moore. And of course, I think the longer the game goes on without a goal, then Sheffield United become more direct into him, even though they do use him a lot anyway. It's just about how the defenders handle him, and a lot of that will be keeping him away from goal, trying to keep a high line, and making sure that he doesn't come in the box and he is a problem. But I mean, looking at those two semi-finals, he's probably worrying about Dan Ballard than he is worrying about anything else because he was just immense in those two games, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think there'll be plenty of practice and defending set pieces, I think, on the training pitch in the build-up to the game. Look, I don't really want to think about this too much, but I'll kind of end with this a little bit. But David, how important do you think it is that Sunderland do go up? Because if you read all the rumours, you've talked about links with Patterson, there's loads of others. There's always lots of scouts watching Sunderland. If all that's true, if we don't go up, we might require a little bit of a rebuild. So do you think we're in a good place to do that? Or do you think it'll be a huge blow if we don't end up going up?
Listen, I know that there's been a lot of talk over the last few seasons about the model and, whether it was the right thing in the beginning and, there's a lot of doubt about it. But I think if you see the club the way it is now, in the position that it's in now, that, gearing the club up to a position where they can develop players, if they need to sell them, they can sell them at a high price and then reinvest back into the squad. And so the position the club's in at the moment, I mean, you've already seen, I don't know if you've seen this week, talk about Job going at the end of the season, regardless of, apparently. But, that's already started. So, but the way that things have gone the last few seasons, the way the squad's been developed, then you have to trust in what's happening at the club and knowing that even if they don't go up, you might lose the odd player, but there'll be players coming in. There's players already, in and around the squad that have been there that can come into the squad. And it'll be, it's always a continual work in progress. Now, if they do go up, then, maybe, that might have to change a little bit because you can't be a development team really in the best team in league in the world, that'll have to change. And it's, people talk about, about how young the team is, how much, cosmetic surgery it might need once you go into in the Premier League. It's never too early to get in the Premier League, is it? Another season in the Premier League. And it'll be huge for the club. And not only for next season, regardless of what happens, if they do go up and, getting way ahead of myself here, but if they did go up and then they came back down again, the club would be in a far greater place than it is at the moment. So I'm just fingers crossed that everything goes well, turn up on the day. They're not overawed by the occasion, which I don't think they will be. And then they give the same type of performance mentally that they gave in the playoffs, because they were there 1,000,000% and in the right place for 1,000,000%. And if they bring that attitude to this game, then I've got full confidence that they'll do it.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, how's your confidence? You think we'll do it?
Do you know what? I don't, at the end of the day, I don't know. But I'll go right back to the start of what I was saying right at the start of the podcast, that regardless of whether they go up or not, the club's in a real good place. The squad's in a real good place, and compared to 4 or 5 years ago, it's a million miles away. So, like I said, there's no pressure. There'll be no doom and gloom if we don't go up. It'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And go on, Gav. Your goal was glass half full. Are you confident?
Always confident, mate. Always confident. I'm not nervous, which is saying a lot. I know. Yet, but I'm just not. Honestly, I mean what I said before about pressure, Chris. I don't think there's a great deal of pressure on Sun, and we'll be all right next season. Sheffield United have got more to worry about than us because they've spent a lot of money. They don't go up. All of a sudden, you're looking over your shoulder. You're thinking, where can we raise funds to just, get this massive wage bill down and try and rebuild? Whereas with us, we aren't in that position. If we don't go up, yeah, we might have to sell a few players, but we'll be all right. We'll be absolutely fine. If we do go up, then sky's the limit. I'm just excited to see this version of Sunderland in the Premier League with a bigger budget to recruit better players. To me, there's very little downsides to the outcome of this weekend. Regardless, we've had a really good season. So maybe I'll be a little bit more nervous as we get closer to it, but I'm not feeling it as of recording. I'm still feeling okay.
Well, there you go. There's a perfect place to end today. And I suppose it just leaves us to say thank you very much, David. Have a cracking weekend wherever you're watching it. And it's been an absolute pleasure as always, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed that, Matt.
Good stuff. Hopefully catch up soon. And Gav, you've already hinted we've got other guests already in the bag. That's going to be released in the next couple of days, but we're going to have loads in the build-up, aren't we?
Yes, every day. Different podcast every day. Different people chatting about the game. Proper cup build-up. Not like... I suppose the cup, not like the BBC who gave it about 2 hours the other day. I hear all these stories about the FA Cup being a full day thing from like 8:30 in the morning. And I'm like, right, when does the coverage start? And it's like an hour and a half before. So here at Roker Report, we're giving the playoffs the attention it deserves.
That's it. Love to hear. Brilliant old-fashioned cup final build-up. We'll do all that. We'll see if we can get on live or something on Spaces from 9 o'clock on Saturday morning or something like that. Well, everyone's got a hangover off of Friday. But anyway, cheers, Gav. And thanks again for everyone for listening. As Gav said, we'll have all the build-up covered this week, either on the website or, like we said, daily releases on How We're the Podcast. Gav's already got a few in the bag. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.